Welcome everyone to the fourth Zoom call here with Cast Strips. We would love to hear in the chat where people are joining from, or if you participated in this past week in the Clothing Waste Reduction Challenge, please share with us maybe what you did for upcycling or looking in your wardrobe this past week. We would love to hear some examples, and we'll share some in a few minutes. We are beginning the final week of the Waste Reduction Challenge here. This month-long challenge has been brought to you by all of us here at Cast Strips, and we do hope that this has given you a really fun and thought-provoking project to reduce your waste and review your consumption habits.
For those of you who don't know, our main aim at Cast Strips is to educate, challenge and inspire students to become conscientious global citizens. We're passionate about sustainable travel and sustainability in general, and that's what this is all about.
Exactly. We here at Cast Strips, we plan to continue these challenges for students internationally, and you can find the details for all of our various challenges on caststrips.org underneath the challenges section. Remember, you can find all of the waste reduction worksheets and our live stream recordings on our website or on YouTube. So you can use that even after the waste reduction challenge wraps up next week. But for now, we would like to discuss the very interesting week we had regarding sustainable fashion. So take it away, Catherine.
Okay, so we had, again, some great responses this week. Most of the, well, actually all of the submissions had some pretty impressive meticulous wardrobe auditing. People started to recognize what materials their clothes were made from, and most people also recognize that they want to change their consumer habits and become more aware of what they're buying when they buy clothes. It was actually quite an educational experience, according to most of the submissions as well, because people started to discover and be more educated about different fabrics and materials and everything as well. Some of the really outstanding things we received were some of the upcycling things that people did. So we had Ria, who made a pin cushion from a damaged pair of jeans, which was pretty impressive. We had a few people make face masks. We had Bibek, Nagasa and Zemena all made face masks from old clothes. Diego actually asked his mum to teach him how to sew, so he got behind the sewing machine and made a reusable shopping bag, which looked pretty impressive from the picture. Valeria actually got one of her old white singlets and tie-dyed it and made it nice and colourful. And Olivia reinvented an old t-shirt she had into a tube top. So we had some really amazing creative upcycling submissions this week. Don't forget your weekly submission can be sent to the waste reduction at caststrips.org.
Yeah, it looks like in the chat here, we're getting a lot of similar really creative upcycling challenges that people were doing, especially because of the current situation we are in. A lot of people are making masks, which I really applaud. So great use of this challenge to also help out the world. This final week brings everything that we've been discussing in waste reduction together and allows us to create a plan to live more sustainable lives in the future and down the road. So in today's interview, we're going to look at waste reduction as a part of a bigger picture in the current global sustainability conversation. Now, if you have questions during today's interview with David, please put them in the chat. For the first 10 minutes, I'm going to be going through your questions, and some of the great ones I'll ask you to actually come on and in video ask David your questions at the end of our interview. So feel free to ask anything that you're wondering in the chat. For now, I would really like to introduce David from Turin, Italy. He is representing Fridays for Future Italy and here to answer some questions for us. So welcome, David.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
Yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about Fridays for Future and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So Fridays for Future is a global youth movement which was born around August 2018, originally in Sweden, thanks to Greta Thunberg, you might know her. But then it rapidly spread all the way to Germany and even Italy, and now in over 167 countries around the world. As Fridays for Future, it is a student-led movement, but we're trying to include every age group, and everyone is invited to join the movement. And what we do is basically, we skip school on Friday, to put it simply, but we don't do it just to skip school hours. We do it because we have fear for the future we will have to live in. Skipping school is one of the most disruptive tools we have to make our voices heard, because as students we are invited in a privileged world that we live in to follow the lessons and to attend school. And so this tool gives us a lot of attention, and we've seen during the global strikes the amount of attention that we're able to raise with the school strikes. But why exactly do we skip school on Fridays? Well, we do it because we are asking governments and institutions around the world to do their best to maintain global emissions and global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. And as of now, the biggest thing that governments around the world have done to try to reduce emissions is the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is a treaty between countries that are part of the UN, the United Nations, and its aim is in fact to reduce emissions under 1.5 degrees Celsius. The problem with that is that no country that has signed the Paris Agreement is actually in line with it. So governments around the world have made a promise to protect our future, but they're not keeping that promise. And we as students, we don't have the right to vote. We don't have the right to make our voices heard in a way that can actually impact the legal system and the government. That's why we strike. That's why we skip school on Fridays. In Italy, the movement was born around the end of 2018, I would say December, and the first strike happened in Rome, and it was one student who just went to the streets with a sign, and after that the movement spread really quickly, really rapidly to many other cities, for example Turin, where I organize in. And I remember the first time I went to the streets, we were only three people, and then the next Friday, we were five. And it was people we didn't know, students who we reached out to thanks to the internet. It were students who believed in the climate crisis and who were fighting for the future, just like me. And then the week after, we were just one student again. And then every Friday, we started coming to the streets, we started networking, we started connecting people together. And on the 15th of March, the first global strike happened, and over 475,000 people only in Italy came to the streets, and over 2 million people in 160 countries, if I recall correctly. And why do we do these strikes? Why do we organize these global mass mobilizations? Well, our demands are pretty simple. We have three core demands, and that is to keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. The other one is to ensure climate justice and equity, and to ensure an equal and just transition to a more sustainable way of living. And the last one is to listen to the best united science currently available. And that can be the IPCC, for example, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a coalition of over 2,000 scientists representing the different states of the United Nations. In Italy, we have different demands. That's because Fridays for Future is a grassroots movement, meaning everyone can take part in the protests, everyone can join in and help organize and help do stuff, and anyone can put pressure on the local institutions. And so we let local groups and national groups decide what's best for them and what are the best demands that they can be asking to the local governments. And in Italy, our main demand is a future, which we use as an acronym for three sub-demands, which is to be out of fossil fuels. That means to end all subsidies, all investments in fossil fuels and make sure banks bail out people and not big corporations and big fossil fuel corporations. The second sub-demand is to be all united in this crisis. Nobody should be left behind and everyone should be helped to undergo the ecological transition that is necessary and to help the people who will be affected by the climate crisis. And the last demand that we have is to break the silence on the climate crisis. And this demand is directed towards the media outlets and the press, in which we try to ask that they don't ignore the climate crisis and they speak about it as if it is an actual crisis, because it is. Often it's referred to as something that is abstract, and in schools it is taught as something that is already being dealt with. Well, that is not true, and so it has to be called, it has to be named with the correct terms and the correct urgency that it requires. So yeah, that's pretty much what Fridays for Future is.
Okay, so you have different demands in your area. So how's it been received by, local government and organizations in Turin?
In Turin, we've had a really productive relationship with the local institutions. We were able to build a bridge between the movement and the town hall. And we actually have a group of scientists working with us, which are climate scientists, meteorological scientists, and university scientists and lecturers. And what we do is that we have passed a motion in the town hall, which is a climate emergency declaration motion, which states that the local government recognizes the urgency that the climate crisis demands, and it tries to do all it can, all that it is in its power to contrast the climate crisis and to help the people in the town. And one thing, the motion itself was written by us, Fridays for Future, and one thing that we put there is that the local government should feed us every 2 months with a summary, a report of what it has been done in the local government to contrast the climate crisis, what action has been taken, what legislation has been passed. And every 2 months, we feed this data to our local group of scientists, and we try to understand if the town hall has actually done anything at all to try to contrast the climate crisis, or if what they've given us is just scrambled data to make it look like they've done something, well, actually they have not. We work really closely with the local institutions to organize the climate strikes. And it should be noted that the climate strikes is not the youth going against the adults or the people in power. It's we as human beings having fear over future and asking for change, all together without separation, without differences, going against the problem, not other people. And so we don't see it as a fight against the local institution. We try to get the local institution to work with us to get to the objectives that we have. So yeah, we have a really close relationship in our local group, but it is not the case for every local group. In many cases, the movement is regarded as an inconvenience or something that is disrupting public organization and something that is not good for the public. And so in our local group, we have a really good relationship. But for example, on a national level in Italy, that relationship is not good at all. In fact, many politicians in Italy still regard the climate crisis as something subjective, something that is not a fact, something sometimes that is not even true. And so politicians in Italy are actively ignoring science, actively ignoring facts, and actively ignoring the truth.
David, why do you think the initiative has been so successful as a global initiative?
I think one of the key factors that has played with that is that it is a youth-led movement. And it makes people understand how the youth is fighting for their future. I'm fighting for the world that I will have to live in. I'm fighting for the future that my children will have to live in. Um, and that's why it has gone a lot of traction. It has had a lot of traction, and why the youth itself feels that they can be part of it. Um, and also the fact that we don't discriminate against anything. Anyone can be part of the movement. Anyone can help however they want to help, however they have time to help. Uh, in the movement itself, nobody is forced to do anything. Anyone can dedicate the time that they have and that they feel they can give to the movement. And so we try to build a really friendly environment in which people can feel comfortable and safe in doing activism. Um, Also, the fact that the science is clear, there is no more doubt about the climate emergency being urgent as it is. And because the effects of the climate emergency are actually being seen already, we can see the major storms and floods in the global south. We've seen the hurricane hitting India and Bangladesh just last week. And these have been worsened by the climate crisis. So the science is clear, the facts are there, and it is visible, and people are already being affected by it. So I think that's why it has gotten a lot of traction lately.
It's a perfect example of thinking global and acting local, which is often mentioned in the IB, and we're always talking about ACAS trips.
Exactly. That kind of leads us into the waste reduction challenge a bit, looking at what we can do. Can you explain some of the factors that reducing waste and moving to a more sustainable lifestyle will impact the fight against climate change?
Yeah, so when talking about reducing, for example, plastic waste, plastic is essentially oil. So by reducing plastic usage, you reduce the ask and the demand for oil production and the oil extraction. And reducing plastic waste, you actually reduce the amount of plastic that will have to be incinerated. Because even when we recycle plastic, it's not said that that plastic will actually be recycled. Most of the time, it will be carried to a center, a plastic collection center, in which part of the plastic that you have tried to recycle will be selected to then be actually recycled, but the majority of it will not be recycled because it is dirty or it's in a manner that it cannot be recycled. And that plastic has to go somewhere, either unfortunately dumped into oceans or many times incinerated to produce energy. But when this waste gets incinerated, then we have the toxic emissions deriving from the incineration of this waste. So by reducing your own waste, your own plastic waste, you reduce the amount of these emissions, and you reduce the amount of pressure that goes into waste centers. I don't know if that's the correct translation, but yeah. Also, one of the key factors in emissions is clothing. It's very important not to fall into the fast fashion trap. And I think that was also one of the themes of the CAS challenges. As we know, fashion is one of the most polluting factors in the industry. And so it's very important not to buy new clothes just because they've gone in trend or just because your old clothes don't fit in the standards anymore. It's important to reuse clothes. It's important to give the clothes that, for example, that you don't fit in anymore, to people who need them. And you can buy clothes from centers in your city, which are not new clothes, but they are clothes that other people don't need anymore, and you can reuse them in that way. But unfortunately, what we have learned with Fridays for Future is that by talking with local scientists and IPCC scientists, is that individual actions, unfortunately, are not enough anymore. And even if everyone on this world would reduce their emissions, change their energy plans not to use fossil fuels anymore, which is already impossible because it is impossible to think that anyone can afford the ecological transition. But even if everyone has done that, we will still have the current emissions rising because we already have a lot of emissions up in the atmospheres which cannot be removed. And we already have industries and corporations and fossil fuels extraction which will still continue to produce emissions. So what we can do, for example, as school children, as people who do not have the right to vote, as people who cannot afford to install solar panels on the roof, or to completely, for example, um, change their house and the way they live in, because many times it is pretty expensive to do so. One thing we can do is to actually raise awareness with our family, with our relatives, and with the people we know, teachers and friends, and talk to them about the climate crisis. And already by raising awareness, it will mean that the people will want change, and the government will have to reflect what the people want. Will have to reflect the change that the people want. One thing you can do is to put pressure on your local or national institutions. You can send emails to your local representatives, pushing for certain laws, pushing for certain things that they can do to contrast the climate crisis. And also, one thing that we really push to and raise attention to is the aspect of equity. And that is that the ecological transition shouldn't be left on the shoulders of the people. The government and the institutions should help the people enact this ecological transition. And it should be done that the government helps people, for example, with public transport, or by investing more in green energy instead of fossil fuels. When that is not done, then the aspect of equity is completely ignored. And the weight and the responsibility of the climate crisis is left solely on the people, solely on the shoulders of us youth, who will have to deal with it in the future.
Yeah, I think it's responsibility of everyone to make as much influence as they can on the people around them. That's part of actually what we're going to do with the challenge in the following week. I just want to talk to you about the activism amongst the lockdown that you're in at the moment. So, what solutions have you found to continue your work while you're not able to go out and be in front of the local council, or how are you managing that in lockdown?
Yeah, so with the lockdown, we cannot protest in the streets anymore, of course. So it is harder to get our message across and to get our voices heard. But we're using the technologies that are available today to make sure that we don't disappear and that our voices are still heard and that we're still active in this period. And it's important to note that the climate crisis is a crisis itself, as well as the corona crisis. They should not be compared. But it's fascinating to note how governments and institutions have been really fast in some cases in reacting to the corona crisis, while the climate crisis is completely being ignored. So in this period, we're trying hard to push on the fact that the climate crisis is also a crisis and will have drastic effects on our society. And it should not be ignored, but it should be treated as an actual crisis, the way it is and the way the corona crisis is being treated. So what we do is we've started climate strikes online, which are basically mass Zoom calls in which activists all over the world join into a massive Zoom call. And we discuss what aspects of the climate crisis have hit us the most. Or also we talk about how the corona crisis is affecting us, just to pass the time. And in this Climate Strikes Online, we try to involve journalists as well, so that they see that the youth is still very much concerned about the climate crisis. And one very big thing that we do is also digital campaigning. We've launched different campaigns, for example, Polluters Out, which is a campaign that asks and demands that the polluters, such as the fossil fuels companies and the banks that invest in these fossil fuels the most, be left out of the conversation about the climate crisis in, for example, the COP, which is the Conference of Parties. It is the biggest moment in which all political leaders should be talking about the climate crisis. In Italy, we've launched the campaign that is called Back to the Future. And that's because we see a lot in the newspapers and in cable news that at some point we will go back to normal and everything will be fine. But actually, we don't want to go back to normal because normal was actually the problem. We're trying to go back to the future, back to a way of living that is sustainable to all, for the people and for the planet we live in. And in this transition back to the future, we have now the opportunity to actually start this transition now, because as the lockdown has happened, we are all on hold. There are a lot of investments that governments are putting in to relaunch the economy, and governments have a choice where to put these investments. They can either put them back where they used to put them, in enormous subsidies and investments in fossil fuels companies. They can still keep financing the banks that promote and invest into drilling and oil extraction, or they can put these investments in creating new jobs in, for example, the renewable energy sector. They can help people undergo the transition in this period where it is easier to do it. We've also done social and email bombings, which does not involve violence. It basically means that we bombard a certain politician with emails and social media comments to regard a specific law that is being passed or ignored, or to regard a specific legislation or things that they should be doing during the climate crisis and the corona crisis.
David, I just wanted to ask you, on behalf of the students who are listening to the call, or students in general, how can they get involved in Fridays for Future if they, like through their local area, what steps do they need to take to get involved?
Yeah, so one thing they can do is to go to the website, which is fridaysforfuture.org. I'm going to type it in the chat. Okay. And there will be a list of local groups and national groups. Many national groups will have their own website. So you can actually search on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever social media you're on, Fridays for Future, and then the name of the region or city or country you live in. And you can reach out to the movement thanks to the website. We have an email there, and you can contact us through that email, or you can go on social media and contact us through the social media accounts. And when the lockdown is over and when we will start again going to the strikes, you can look at your local social media account for the Fridays for Future movement in your local area and see when we'll do the local strikes, and you can join the strikes on the Friday. And from there, the activists will be able to tell you what you can do in that certain local group to help out and how you can get involved better.
Excellent, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, David.
Put
We
that in
do
the
have,
email we send out this week.
yeah, definitely will include that. We do have a question. I would like to bring Michelle on here to ask her a question for you.
Hi, David.
Did it work? There you go.
Thanks for sharing your story. I really appreciate that you're a student that is taking action and using your voice to impact change about what matters to you. I'm a teacher, and so that to me is the most important message that I can deliver to my students, is that learn about what matters to you and take action to impact change. You mentioned that governments sometimes ignore the truth. And I was wondering, how do you decide what is the truth? Where do you get your information from? And how do you determine what is the truth when there's so much conflicting information?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. What we try to do is to never ourselves talk about how the climate crisis is affecting us. What we do is actually call on to the local or national group of scientists that we are in contact with. That would be the Italian, for example, in Italy, the Italian Meteorological Association, or the IPCC scientists. And the IPCC is, as I mentioned before, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And that's the most solid place to find information about climate change. And what we do, for example, in a debate, is to never throw in facts that we are not sure of, but we talk with facts and we mention the sources of these facts that we mention, because it is very easy that in the debate then people just start throwing in facts that might even be helpful to the movement, but that are not true, and that is very hurtful for the conversation, and then gives the ability to the other side to throw in random facts and to undermine the climate emergency as they have been doing. And what you can see in a climate change debate is that the people who will try to undermine the climate crisis will mostly not link or share the resources and the sources they have gotten their information from, and they will try to maybe talk about certain studies about how climate change is not real. For example, I remember one of my teachers gave me a link to a study in which 500 scientists sent a letter to the UN saying that the climate crisis doesn't exist and it's actually the cloud formation that is messing with it all. And what you see is that the number of studies that confirm the climate crisis and the level of the academic level that is put into these studies is much greater than the number of studies that undermine it. Mm-hmm. And when we never try to argue a certain study, we ask the scientists that we are in contact to do that for us. And so when we are in an argument and we have the opportunity to respond later on, we take the certain question or argument that was made against us, we talk it through with our local, national, or international group of scientists, and we try to understand what the real science is behind it. And also, really, since you're a teacher, we have actually Teachers for Future, which is a group of teachers around the world who try to raise awareness within the students and the parents and the school environment.
That's a really good offshoot. I think that is a really important question to be asking. It's really hard to find the facts that you can believe and be truthful, which is one of the reasons we really appreciate you being here, David, because someone like you who's put so much effort and time into this movement can really share where you're coming from and what you know. And I think everyone here participating today really does appreciate what you were able to share with us. David was actually scheduled to be a speaker with Castrips at our Global Student Conference this summer in 2020. Of course, because of the situation, things have changed a little bit. But we will be having our Global Student Conference in 2021, July and August. We will be in Singapore, Boston, and Edinburgh, and the opportunity is for individual students and participants from around the world to come participate. We'll be talking about climate change and its connection to COVID-19. So fun little connection there to how we first came in contact with David. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, David. We really, really appreciate everything that you were able to share with us today. Thank you. A reminder about the Global Student Conferences to everyone. During the very first live stream, we announced that we are giving away a spot for one ticket to the Global Student Conferences in 2021. If you share and tag 3 friends on our Instagram giveaway post, we will be announcing that winner next week on our final Zoom call. So go ahead and check out our Instagram if you haven't participated yet, and invite some friends to the Global Student Conference with Castrips.
We want to now look forward to what we're going to do over the next week. So the theme of the week is going to be general waste reduction, and I just want to start by giving everyone a really big congratulations for everything you've achieved over the past 3 weeks. You've made some incredible first steps in changing your waste habits and behaviours, and now we're going to move into first gear by switching over to waste management and how we can continue to keep up the good work that we've been doing over the past couple of weeks. We're going to focus in the worksheet on the 6 R's. There was the 3 R's and there was the 4, now there's the 5 and the 6. But those R's are refuse what you don't need, reduce what you do need, reuse things, so ditch disposable altogether, repurpose things, so that's like the upcycling that we did with the clothing challenge. Recycle, learn what you can recycle and do it 100%. And rot is the last R, which is obviously connected to the food waste and composting. We're going to give you the opportunity to give, we've been giving you tips and tricks in each of the worksheets. Now it's your turn to give yourself the tips and tricks based on the experiences that you've had over the last week. We also want you to create some kind of sign or poster that you're going to put in a prominent place in your house to help influence everyone to get involved and continue practicing the good habits. So we've got a bit of a creative activity for you there. Obviously, we're going to do our reflections again, like every week. And the bonus activity that we've got for this week is to create or invent a system. So whether that's a closed recycling system, composting, a recycling system, food storage organization, whatever you think is appropriate or whatever you think you need in your house, you have the opportunity to create a system to keep the waste reduction keep everyone on top of it. We've also got at the end of the sheet a waste reduction pledge, which is your commitment to changes that you know that you can make. We want you to sign the pledge. We want you to share the pledge, share it with your friends, share it with your school friends. You can copy and paste and share it as much as you like and try and get as many people influenced by changing their behavior as much as possible. If you've got any questions about the challenge, you can ask us in the chat or you can email us at any time on wastereduction@castrips.org.
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing your final projects, or of course, any inspiration projects you've gotten from inspiration from the past 3 weeks of this waste reduction challenge as well. We'll be sharing our favorites on social media, so make sure to tag us at Castrips or by sending us your projects to wastereduction@castrips.org. I will also send that email into the chat. I saw someone asking for it. You can stay in touch with us on social media as well, Facebook and Instagram, Castrips, using the hashtag CastAtHome. And for those of you looking for content but not on social media, it's all on our website, castrips.org. Good luck, everyone, with this final week of the Waste Reduction Challenge. I really hope you make it your own and challenge yourself to make these big steps to keep staying and living more sustainable in the future. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye-bye.